BBC News. In today's report, we'll be addressing the current issue of legal aid, which many defendants have the problem of facing each year. We will be talking about possible reforms and how they can really impact defendants, as well as the legal aid market in response to budget changes.
We will then explain the eligibility criteria and see whether it is easier to get legal aid. We will finish by looking at a recent case heard in the Magistrate Court, which addresses the issues of legal aid and see how the difficulties of legal aid face defendants on a daily basis.
So, you might ask yourselves, what is legal aid?
Legal aid can help meet the cost of legal advice, family mediation, and representation in a court or tribunal.
If your problem is covered by legal aid and you qualify, you could possibly get advice on rights and options, help with negotiations, and also if you're accused of a crime, you can also get advice at a police station.
Then you can always go to a solicitor or barrister to get your case ready and speak on your behalf in court and some tribunals.
The scope of legal aid in recent years has seriously been reduced due to recent reforms. Huge areas of civil law have been removed from the scope of legal aid. All family law that doesn't involve domestic violence are no longer covered, although payments may be made to those to help with mediation. Immigration cases are also only covered if they involve claims for asylum, human rights issues or domestic violence. Benefits, debt and housing cases are also ineligible unless there is a direct threat on homelessness. Criminal cases remain in the scope, but this is subject to means testing.
There has also been cuts in relation to solicitor fees. Fees for solicitors working in the civil sector cases have been cut by up to 10%, while criminal practitioners have had their fees cut by 8.75%. The cut would have been higher, all the way raising up to 17.5%, but in January 2016, the new Justice Secretary, Michael Gove, announced that the second 8.75% cut to fees brought in 2015 was being reversed. In addition, a planned 2/3 cut to the number of police station duty solicitor contracts and changes to the tendering for those contracts were shelved. This is a significant victory for opponents of cuts to criminal legal aid who had brought a number of judicial challenges against the planned reforms. In a previous U-turn, in April 2013, proposals to introduce price competitive tendering, which is known as PCT, for criminal law contracts was abandoned. The government had planned to save money and increase efficiency by introducing bidding for a capped number of contracts.
However, it's not all doom and gloom. Lawyers successfully argued that plans could lead to a bargain basement system dominated by poor quality firms and giant service providers like security firm G4S. It has changed following the passing of the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment Offenders Act of 2012. The Ministry's 4 objectives for the reforms were to discourage unnecessary and adversarial litigation at public expense, target legal aid to those who need it most, make significant savings in the cost of the scheme, and deliver better overall value for money for the taxpayer. We will now be going over to our reporter Sophie, who's in the field and who will be discussing the impact of recent reforms. Sophie.
Adriana. So, recently there have been huge impacts due to the reform. The House of Committee Justice concluded that in its report, the impact of legal aid reform helped make major savings, but also made it considerably hard for litigants to access legal aid, which is a problem to equality before the courts and democracy. Today we are joined by Millie, who has recently struggled to get access to legal aid.
Yeah, I was charged with drink driving and my salary just can't cover the costs of a legal battle, but with the new reforms I found it very hard to get access to legal aid and therefore justice.
This just supports the 2014 NOA report, which concluded the budget had been cut by $300 million a year, which is clearly affecting people like Millie.
Thank you, Sophie, for interviewing on such a cold December day, and Millie for your time. It is estimated, had the reforms not been implemented, the Legal Aid Agency would have been funding 326,000 more cases a year than currently had.
The report concluded that, out of the 4 aims mentioned above for the reforms, they had only been successful in reducing costs. All the rest had failed. They also reported since the reforms, there is actually an underspend in the budget for legal aid, as many who are eligible are not receiving the aid. Despite the exceptional case funding scheme to protect the vulnerable, in many exceptional cases, the funding was not granted, so the vulnerable are still overly exposed. Although those who can provide evidence of domestic violence are still eligible, it is hard for many to get legal aid as they do not have any of the evidence required and it is very difficult to obtain. The report also received evidence that the reforms have affected the legal aid market, and any profit and non-profit organizations have had to cut or downsize their departments, meaning these services are less available to the public. Although there are no specific figures available, there has been a considerable rise in the number of people representing themselves, many of whom have had to do so because they have no other options, such as million-hour case. This is draining court resources, who are forced to provide more assistance to the litigants and more time on their cases. This then raises the question whether money has been saved overall when this extra spending is taken into account. The National Audit Office published a report in 2014 about the legal aid reforms, implementing reforms to civil legal aid, and concluded that the reforms had been rushed and limited evidence had been carried out before, which explains many of the impacts above and the issues of the reforms. Arguably, with more research, this could have been avoided.
Currently, to meet the requirement for legal aid, you must show that your problem is serious and that you cannot pay legal costs. You can get legal aid, for instance, if you and your family are at risk of domestic violence, at risk of homelessness or possibly losing your home, you've been accused of a crime and face prison or detention, you've been discriminated against, or you need family mediation. Also, you can add to your legal argument if your case comes under the Human Rights Act.
Another issue of legal aid is that a lot of people are forced to represent themselves, and this can lead to unfair trial. When representing yourself in court, you may be allowed to have someone to help you in court by taking notes and giving advice. However, they can't speak for you. They cannot interfere with the proceedings and sign documents on your behalf. This is all on you. This person is known as Mackenzie friend, and it is up to the judge to decide whether you can have a Mackenzie friend with you in court. Also, you can still get legal advice to help you with your case, even if you choose to represent yourself in court. This can be from the Citizen Advice or a government website on the law. However, if you're unable to follow all the required procedures to bring your case to trial or to defend yourself against the other side's claims, your case is dismissed or the other side wins their case against you. Due to the fact that legal aid is no longer available to most people seeking a divorce or those involved in custody disputes or issues including immigration, debts and benefits, this can lead to unfair trial when representing yourself, as those who cannot afford their lawyer will have to stand up in front of a judge to represent themselves, and they will be lacking a lot of knowledge in doing so.
Currently, there are serious inequalities in the law. Personal injury, employment and consumer law cases were removed completely from the scope by LASPO, leaving poorer victims in the legal area without aid. Families who are in the middle threshold, not poor enough to get legal aid but not rich enough to be able to afford legal help themselves, often do not have help and are left unrepresented. Drastic proposals after the introduction of LASPO included reducing the availability of legal aid to immigrants in detention and UK prisoners who may have been subject to abuses of power. There is a denial of access to legal justice for thousands of vulnerable people. The Kafka's figures also suggest that many victims of domestic violence are unable to meet the restrictive criteria set by the Legal Aid Agency in order to receive legal aid, meaning partners and parents remain in abusive relationships. This society is not one that we need. Women's rights groups published a report showing 47% of the 117 domestic abuse victims they surveyed took no action in relation to their family problem as a result of not being able to apply for legal funding, while 25% represented themselves.
Also, the court has had to allow more time for unrepresented cases because they take a longer time to find information as they have no solicitors. A literature review published by the Ministry of Justice in 2011 states civil cases had high levels of non-representation, particularly among defendants 85% of individual defendants in county court cases and 52% of high court cases were unrepresented at some stage during their case. Evidently, this shows the courts will need to allow more time for these cases due to litigants not having enough knowledge of the law and need to spend more time building their case, as was evident in the case seen in the magistrate's court. It is difficult for courts to manage caseload when this occurs. The article Access to Justice for Litigants and Purpose, produced by the Civil Justice Council, highlights the increase in demand for the Personal Support Unit, also known as PSU, which provides non-legal support at court to those without lawyers. The article states that there is 40% increase in litigants, which was found in the year of 2010 and 2011, and staff report signs of reduction in legal aid. With reduction in legal aid, more cases will go unrepresented, and the Access to Justice article states that anecdotal evidence from the judiciary also speaks of a considerable increase in self-represented litigants. This, in no doubt, will place pressure on courts and tribunals in managing their time.
During a panorama special, one of our reporters entered a magistrate's court to see the effects up close.
This occurred on the 23rd of November in the Magistrates Court of Exeter, where a case was heard regarding a car accident between an uninsured driver and an ambulance. The accident occurred on the 2nd of June, in which an ambulance on its way to the hospital carrying a patient passing through the traffic made a collision with the defendant's motor vehicle. The defendant pulled his car over to the nearest parking space. However, the ambulance, which was not in a critical state, proceeded on to escort the patient to the hospital, not stopping.
Accordingly, the defendant drove home following the incident, not reporting the crash as so far. In the evening of the day of the crash, the police visited the defendant's parents and notified them that they would be visiting the defendant in the morning. Upon this knowledge, the defendant failed to report the crash within the legal expected 24-hour period, as he believed all would be dealt with once the police had visited him.
The police arrived the following day. You can cut that because I said it twice. The police arrived the following day, 22 and a half hours within the 24-hour period, and charged the defendant for failing to report the incident. The defendant pleaded not guilty to this charge, given the fact that he was to respond within practical time regarding reporting the incident, and this was also altered by the fact that he knew the police were to visit him. He pleads guilty, however, to the other charges. The defendant plans to represent himself as he cannot afford a solicitor. He is to bring his parents as witnesses in his trial in the Crown Court on the 18th of January as directed.
So, summing up today, we can only see that recent reforms have had a radical and drastic effect on the people of our world. So now, we conclude. Thank you, and over to the weather, where we see a sprinkle of festivity. Thank you and good night.